Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly Podcast. Before we start today's show, a word for our friends at Nikon, who are kind enough to send me a pair of their Sportstar Zoom binoculars for the New Zealand ODI series in September. Simpler times for the England ODI setup. They were genuine game changers for my in-ground cricket watching experience. You almost become your own TV director, zooming in on conversations between the batters or the captain and the bowlers. They are compact, lightweight, and boast Nikon's renowned optical quality with multi-coated lenses for the brightest image. They're available in black, dark blue, or white. We are offering our listeners a 10% discount with the code Wisden at checkout. Follow the link in the podcast description to find the Sportstar Zoom binoculars and get your pair for next summer today. If you're someone who goes to a fair bit of live cricket, I'd wholeheartedly recommend them. Phil and Joe are enjoying them, one for the YouTube audience.
I realised halfway through that I was actually using them the wrong way round. So don't do that at home, folks.
Well, it's been a big week for the World Cup and an even bigger one in the race for Champions Trophy qualification. In this show, we'll be looking to the future as much as what's been happening in India. We'll each be picking our England
right?
ODI squads for after the World Cup. We'll also have Saj Sadiq joining us to talk about Bangladesh, Pakistan. I'm Yas Rana, and with me today is Joe Harman and Phil Walker. If I sound a little less perky than usual, I've got a bit of a cold. Not enough rest and rotation in the daily podcast roster for my liking.
Oh, it's an existential crisis.
I think you're not going to make it to the next World Cup. Let's just cull you now. Get someone else in.
You'll always make my squad of 15, yeah. Don't worry about that.
Ayushka asked, any suggestions for TV shows or movies to get away from this World Cup?
That's a great question. I spent much of my dinner time last night going through my favourite TV shows from the time that me and my wife got together. So the last 6 or 7 years, going through the best TV shows that we watched in our time, doing a top 10 and running down from 10 to 1.
And they were?
Well, number 10 was Mad Men. Number 1 was The Wire. Number 2 was Our Friends in the North, which I recommended to Joe.
You gave me the box set of that, yeah.
Yeah, that's from the 90s, but, you know, you can still watch stuff.
I watched that on the iPlayer. It's brilliant.
Have you? You've seen it?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it's spectacular. If you want to know about the political history of Britain since the 60s.
Still relevant today, I'd say, Phil.
Oh, I would say so, Joe.
Incredible cast. Genuinely incredible cast.
Christopher Eccleston, Gina McKee, Mark Strong, and Daniel Craig, wherever it happened to be.
Some incredible accents as well.
And some shocking wigs, but a masterpiece.
I'd personally recommend the prison drama Time. Season 2 just come out with Jodie Whittaker. Grim viewing, but very good.
Top Boy.
Top Boy's very good as well. Anyway, Phil, you weren't on Sunday's daily after the England-India game. Do you have any semi-original reflections on that latest shit show?
Semi-original. I like that. Well, I've got to be honest. It was, as you know, it was my birthday over the weekend, right? Or my birthday week.
Yeah.
It began on Thursday and culminated on Saturday.
No, so your birthday was on Thursday, but it began before Thursday.
Yeah. And England played on Sunday, is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. And my mum came over and we went out, you know, me and Emily and my mum went out for the whole day. We had a lovely day. We went to see a music recital at the Royal Albert, and then we went for an Italian meal and then watched the Russell Crowe film of an evening. So the cricket didn't massively register.
Sounds a lot better than our day, doesn't it?
Yes, sounds a lot
better.
It
didn't massively register. When my mum came around in the morning, I was watching England sort of manfully do their thing in the field, and I thought the bits that I saw, Wokes bowled quite nicely, but I wasn't paying massive amounts of attention to it. Obviously, I was following the score when I went out and about. It was only really when I watched the brief highlights late that night, and when I saw Stokes' shot, I stopped at that point. And because I just couldn't really see anymore, couldn't watch anymore. So I got nothing to add whatsoever. There you go. That's my position on it. And I'd be a liar
quite nicely.
And I'd be a liar to say that I could cobble some bullshit together, but I just have not seen it. And it's a reflection on me that as soon as it becomes basically mathematically impossible, then
not quite mathematically possible.
I know. Then the heart, you know, drains out of it, I suppose. But I've got nothing to add, so there you go.
Great.
That's me.
Joe, we didn't really talk about it on the daily on Sunday, but I found the reaction to the last couple of England defeats quite interesting, in particular from Owen Morgan, because one accusation you'd throw at pundits who are new to the job, who know a lot of the players involved, is they tend to be reserved in their criticism. Owen Morgan has not been reserved in his criticism. What have you made of that? He basically suggested there must be something going on that we don't know about in the England dressing room, something that Mott and other players have refuted since. But for him to even suggest that is quite a big deal.
Yeah, it's a fascinating dynamic that exists there. We interviewed Jos Buttler 6 months ago, something like that, during the IPL, wasn't it? Actually, Isha Guha did it for us, and Butler admitted there that he found it quite difficult, Morgan being in the commentary box, giving his view on the team, and that was when they were doing quite well. So it must have been particularly challenging the last few weeks. And when I spoke to Morgan a couple of months ago, he said, we left it. Me and Joss, good mates, we still go around to each other's house the whole time. We left it. If you ever need any advice, give me a call. And that was how it was left. And Morgan said he hasn't had to call very often. It would seem that Joss hasn't been picking up the phone to Morgan by his reaction. But yeah, for Morgan to come out and say there must be something going on in the changing room, it's almost like he can't believe that what he created has fallen to pieces and there must be some other reason than just they're out of form. Because he did an interview with, Morgan, did an interesting interview with Mel Farrell for Al Jazeera before the India game, in which he said, I don't buy the lack of form thing. That there must be more to it than that. There must be mixed messaging. The selections are poor. That's eroding confidence. He just can't believe that they're just not playing well. And obviously the contract dispute, which Michael Vaughan's gone in pretty hard on over the last couple of days, has also added an extra layer of intrigue to, I guess, I suppose.
Morgan has no relationship with Mott, and I guess it would be a natural flex if you're the emperor and you walk away from the world that you've created. It would perhaps be natural to be slightly disdainful of those mortals who follow in your place. I also thought his comment about Jason Roy was key when there was the outcry about the absence of Brooke in the 15, and then England in a series of mismanaged balls ups reverse pivoted on that one, and then pretended that it was only ever a provisional squad, despite having said the complete opposite when the squad was released. And so perhaps Morgan just looks at it and is understandably trying to find people and reasons to blame for this cock up.
Well, like we all are.
For sure, for sure. Yeah. And it would be natural for him to be loyal to his band of brothers, right? And to be slightly questioning of those who have come from the outside and perhaps in his mind look like they've inadvertently dismantled the thing. Mott, I don't know him at all. Never met him. Never spoken to him. I don't know many people who do know him that well either. I felt a bit for him because, he's fronted up on certain interviews, but he looks sort of listlessly baffled by it. There's a sort of shrugging acceptance, and everyone's just walking around going, "Well, I don't know either." It's sort of bizarre, really. There's a sort of collective sort of lobotomy across the whole scene.
I think it was such a hard job for him to come into, though, because as you say, Morgan stamped his authority on that team so firmly over a number of years. But also in terms of these guys don't actually want to play that much, and you're trying to prepare for a World Cup. And a lot of these guys didn't want to play ODI cricket in the build-up. Obviously, the T20 World Cup went very well, but it must be very hard to sort of get across whatever messages you do want to get across and work out what plan A is if you don't have your best players sort of ever since he came in charge. Like, if you go back to when he came in charge at the start of the 22 summer, they had the Netherlands series. They had a 3-game series against India where they weren't at 100%. A South Africa series where Ben Stokes retires halfway through. And then they have the Australia series after the T20 World Cup that Moeen Ali described as horrible, but 48 hours afterwards, he was captaining a side in the Abu Dhabi T10. They had a South Africa series. I found that
staggering at the time.
That Joe Root then decides not to play for the ILT20. They have a Bangladesh series where none of the test guides are at. And then it's the World Cup, pretty much. It's the New Zealand series for the World Cup. So he didn't really get a chance to work with anyone, really, in the lead up to the World Cup. And I do feel very sorry for him.
My guess is, for what it's worth, that Mott will probably go at the end of the tournament because it's going to have been such a disaster that there needs to be some kind of bloodletting. And I don't think there is a natural replacement for Buttler, so I think Buttler would probably carry on as captain. But I don't know if that's going to be fair.
There has to be a head that's going to roll. And so it's inevitably going to be him.
I mean, he's the easy sacrificial lamb here, but in a lot of ways, I guess he was the continuity candidate to follow Bayliss in that, fairly mild-mannered Aussie who operates in the background. And that worked perfectly alongside Morgan. That's exactly what Morgan wanted, because that was very much his changing room with Bayliss as a kind of support when required. It feels like, in a bit like Alistair Cook needed more support from Bayliss than he got as Test captain, it feels like Buttler perhaps needs a bit more support, particularly when things are going so badly. And Mott doesn't convey that. As Phil, I completely agree with Phil. I don't know much about him, really. Mel interviewed him for the magazine a few months back, and that was pretty much the first time I'd read stuff from him in depth. He seems to be like popular in the game, but that isn't necessarily a tick in a massive stick in terms of your CV.
Rob Key needed somebody who was going to be relatively undemonstrative, quite malleable, quite, as Joe says, at ease with being like a background figure. And just as you had a kind of alpha-like figure in McCullum, you needed almost a sort of reflection or an inversion of him to run the white ball sides, which had kind of overachieved if you look at England's history. And the cliche had become, well, it runs itself. Morgan ran it, and then Buttler, who's watched him, and who, by the way, did very well in his stead in that Australia series 3 or 4 years back as an audition, made 100 at Old Trafford in the final game of that series that they won 5-0 under his captaincy. So nobody questioned at the time that it should be Buttler either, but it felt like that setup ran so smoothly that it didn't really matter who had the orange bat and the baseball glove. Well,
I think that underlies the whole thing, though. It runs itself to the point they don't even need to play, is almost the extension to what we've got to here.
Yeah, and we've spoken about this now
a lot
ad nauseum for the last few weeks, but it really does bring it home, I think, when you use those examples of players that have disdained the format and to such that cannot fail to infiltrate your attitude, your commitment to training, your ability to dig really, really deep. You're not going to be playing desperate cricket for something that you don't feel desperate about. Michael Vaughan wrote an interesting thing that you sent over this morning that I just had a read of in his Telegraph piece. And it was a bit ranty and it was a bit absolute. But nonetheless, he makes some uncompromising points regarding this. And he says it's all just too cozy. The top echelon players have an immense amount of power now. And it's reflected, as Vaughan says, in the controversial carve-up of the central contracts that's dropped halfway through a World Cup, one of whom, perhaps England's most effective seamer, isn't a recipient of anything.
Not one of the 29.
He's told that while he's literally wearing the shirt in David Willey. Not one of the 29, as you say. You imagine what kicking the bollocks that must be for him. So that's
and Vaughan
at best an eccentric timing, right, to bring these things out. But again, the fact and where I do agree with Vaughan is that the tiered system creates a sense of upstairs, downstairs, right, across the setup. And when you're trying to engender a kind of unity across a squad and a all for one for allness of it, then that's going to be. It's going to be challenging. It's going to be difficult.
Yeah, and Vaughan, I think, talking practically was like, there's no way the players weren't talking about this all the time, especially given that this batch of contracts was more complicated than any negotiations they would have done in the past. We'll touch on the contracts again later, but for the next 10 or so minutes, we're going to talk about the future. So listener Aaron got in touch after the Sri Lanka defeat last week to say, ouch, what a day. Hard to get your head round how we've gone from being so good to quite so bad in 4 years. Certainly feels like White Ball Reset 2.0 is on the cards, which got me and a few mates thinking about how the team might look going forward. It would be great to get your thoughts on this and what other players you'd like to see in the side to take over from the old guard. Sad to say goodbye to these legends in what certainly feels like the end of a great era, but can no longer shy away from the fact that their time is surely up in this format. So inspired by Aaron, we've picked out our 15s for the future. Joe, do you want to go first?
Can I just, before we go, is the criteria the West Indies tour in December, or is it, say, a nucleus of a team for the next 12, 18 months?
Well, England's, I think, only have West Indies in 3 games in December, and then they don't play at all until Australia in September. So
I picked mine for Australia. I think that because
let's do that, because obviously
the Caribbean squad are going to have none of the World Cup squad there.
Let's do that. Let's do September onwards into next winter as well.
Yeah. Joe, do you want to go first?
Well, I ended up just doing an 11 with the rest. So I had Crawley.
Sorry, is this your 11?
This is my 11,
Okay.
yeah. So I had Zach Crawley, Will Jacks, Ollie Pope, Harry Brook, Ben Duckett, Joss Buttler. 7, I had Sam Curran or Rian Ahmed, sort of depending on conditions. Bryden Cast, Gus Atkinson, Adil Rashid stays in there, and Jofra Archer, fingers crossed. And then the rest of the squad was Phil Salt, Rian Ahmed or Sam Curran, John Turner, and Josh Tongue. And unlucky to miss out. I'm going to get a lot of anger about Sam Hain not being there. It was Sam Hain or Ollie Pope for me at 3. I think they're both really good candidates for that role. And you could absolutely argue that Sam Hain is the one with the record in that format and Pope hasn't played it for ages. But when is Pope going to get the opportunity to play much one-day cricket? 5 ODIs against Australia at the back end of next summer feels like a really good opportunity. And I think he's too good a talent not to see what he can do at that level and feels like quite a natural replacement for Joe Root in that role.
Could you just run through your 11 again, just so I get it in my head?
Yeah, Crawley, Jacks, Pope, Brook, Duckett, Buttler, Curran stroke, Rian Ahmed, Cast, Atkinson, Rashid, Archer.
Okay.
Phil?
Have you picked one as well? Go on, you go.
Mine's quite similar to Joe's, actually. So I've gone Crawley, Jacks, Pope, Duckett, Brook, Jamie Smith, Rehan Ahmed at 7, Cast, Atkinson, Sakeem Mahmood / Jofra Archer, fitness depending really, Reece Topley, 11. And then my 4 on the bench are Livingston, Salt, Sam Curran and Tom Hartley.
So no Buttler?
No Buttler.
And none of the other heavy hitters?
So the only
Topley's
one who's
the
been
only
playing
one.
is like Topley and Livingston's on the bench. I guess for me, I'm moving on for Buttler and Rashid purely because of how few opportunities there are for the best young players to play 50 over cricket. I think they have to go all in on the players they think will be there in 2027. Butler's the same age now as Morgan was in 2019.
But given Butler doesn't play Test cricket and he's just got a new contract, so he's got a 2-year contract for playing no cricket.
Yeah, I mean,
that's not your fault.
Yeah,
but
it's
but
not
I'm
my
just
fault.
raising. This is an issue with this process.
Yeah,
that England have just given quite a lot of long-term contracts to quite old players who might not play any more white ball cricket.
So I was thinking. So I initially had Butler down instead of Jamie Smith, but then I was thinking, well, I think it's unlikely that Butler reaches the 2027 World Cup, and Jamie Smith needs to play, if he's going to be the keeper, he needs to play as many 50 over games as possible because he's not going to get them for anywhere else. And the same with
So
Adil
Butler would be
Rashid, really.
36.
37 for the next World
37.
Cup. Yeah.
In 4 years' time.
There is also an argument, though. I mean, I think he could make it to World Cup, but even if he doesn't, there is an argument to have some senior players in there for the young players to play alongside for the first bit. And the Champions Trophy, caveat, if they qualify for it, that is still a thing worth trying to win. So that's why. So Adil Rashid, for instance, probably unlikely he's playing at the next World Cup, but I think there's value in him playing the next couple of years, trying to win a Champions Trophy, and also being there alongside Rian Ahmed. I remember Rashid talking about how much better a bowler he was playing alongside Moeen as 2 spinners. They won't always have that luxury, but the idea of fantasy 11 with Rashid and Rian Ahmed at times, with Rian Ahmed batting at 7, I think that could work.
It's a fair point.
So I'm Denard over Butler and Smith. Jamie Smith being the natural heir apparent, probably to him in the middle order. And I went with Butler in the end. But it would all be dependent or contingent on whether he can face it, whether he will be so stung by what's happened here that he will be re-energized to try and right this horrifying wrong. And perhaps as well, if you were to relinquish the 50 over stuff from him, then perhaps that also weakens his commitment to the 20 over side. And I don't want to lose England's greatest ever white ball player at 32 because of the shit show of the last few weeks, if he is still motivated to play. But that is a big, big if. And you'd have to sit him down, and Key would have to look at the whites of his eyes and really try and decipher if he's truly up for it, properly up for it. He's a naturally fit cricketer. He's not really suffered too many injuries. It could be that he could play in 4 years' time, not as a keeper, but as a Dhoni-like number 6. It's been weird to watch him so vulnerable. He averages next to nothing in India in 50-over cricket. He keeps getting out in the same way, leaden-footed, driving on the up through the offside. All of that shakes you to your core, because if there's one thing you can guarantee, it's that Jos Buttler knows how to score white ball runs in the middle order of 50-over cricket. But it doesn't make him a bad player, what's happened in the last few weeks. He is complicit in the kind of structural complacency that's resulted in this, but perhaps he will feel more motivated than ever before to get out the other side of this and try and rebuild again. In which case, if he does, then I'd want him around. There's also something else to add that, we can't just sort of kick these games to one side. These are international cricket matches against Australia and others. The Champions Trophy is the second 50-over tournament out there. It should be something that you should be desperate to win. Anyone who was here seeing India-Pakistan 4 or 5 years ago will recognise that that's a tournament of great value. England now need to qualify for it, by the way, almost certainly, because only the top 7 go through, right? So they'll need to play some meaningful cricket. And if we want to respect the 50-over game as we should, then these games are not just exhibition games. There's jeopardy and value in these games. So I've gone with Buttler but as I say, totally contingent on whether he's up for it.
Yeah, just to add before you do your squad, we've got a T20 World Cup before this squad will be playing, if you saw him, before the ODIs against Australia. And I think certainly Buttler and Rashid's future might well hinge on that tournament. If they win it, I might say, well, we'll go out in style. Why would we carry on with 50-over cricket? Again, if it's another bad tournament for England, they might decide, let's call it a day at this point. So it's a tricky thing picking this squad, particularly for that reason, that the T20 sides and 50-over sides are still very linked, and we've got a big world tournament before all this stuff happens.
Yeah, it's a fair point. I think there might be some people listening to this being like, okay, if the Champions Trophy is important, if England get there, someone like Root is only going to be 34 by the time the Champions Trophy. But I think it's really important that you have, as Phil, you were saying, you have players who are totally committed to this. I think the embarrassment of this World Cup stems from the lack of respect they had towards ODI cricket. I don't think you can have players who basically don't want to play it. I think if there's any hint of that from anyone, I think whoever the coach is,
get some hungry players in.
Yeah, get some players who actually want to play for England. I know that might sound overly simplistic, but
I would also say on Buttler, no reason why he needs to be the captain at all, really. There's obviously logic to splitting the 20 and 50-over captaincy anyway. Him playing in the team shouldn't necessarily mean that he has to be the captain. If this has drained him, and he's certainly he's made some eccentric decisions at the toss, he's made some eccentric decisions in selection, he's made some eccentric in-game decisions as well over the last few weeks. Perhaps the components of the job don't suit him at this juncture, at this point in his career. Perhaps. He's still an all-time great number 6 white ball cricketer. So, yeah, he's in my team, but I'm not fussed about him being the captain at all. Which sort of leads to other captaincy options. We can kind of... So who was your captain in your squad? Have you picked one?
I've gone Crawley just because he's already done it.
Okay.
But...
Not a huge amount of candidates.
There's not exactly
obvious candidates,
exactly. Realistically, it's Crawley or Brooke out of the players I selected.
I mean, Pope at a push, which sounds ridiculous given he's barely played the format, but he is obviously considered, leadership material, and that he's been vice skipper of the Test sides. But yeah, Crawley would seem the favourite.
Yeah.
Well, who's established as the best white ball captain in English cricket? The one who's won lots of
James
things.
Vince.
James Vince. Who's the player who's averaged, incidentally, chaps, 68, 55, 52 and 79 in every summer where there's been a substantial amount of 50-over cricket played in England? James Vince, who's also the best goddamn player to watch in the history of the world. Anyway, look, he's made my 15. I don't know about captaincy. I don't know about that because it's a big ask to come into a side. But then it is a completely open canvas now, right? Blank canvas. So it's not beyond the realms. If he's established as the best captain, white ball captain in the game, the most storied and travelled 50-over batter that England have, who's made runs all over the world, then it's not a madness.
They might need to give him a contract.
Perhaps, but what do these things mean, really?
Well, to him, quite a lot, because he gets a lot of deals overseas.
Sure, but I think if they were to say, clearly they can add
probably
a 30th,
add another one,
right? They can add a 30th. If they're basically
that was what I thought was particularly cruel about David Willey. They've given 29. Why can't you just go 30 and give it to the bloke who's playing in the World Cup?
Yeah,
But
they're going to be
anyway.
paying empty money to lots of cricketers over the next few years. Where's the harm in giving one more contract?
Yeah,
in there, right?
so, we had a question on this. Richard asked, without management, captaincy or selection turnover, can young England players trust that they'll get a fair chance given the multi-year contract just handed out to most of this failing team? I mean, on the contracts, it is extraordinary how many of the older players have these contracts that take them well past their 35th birthday.
Yeah, it's
we were talking
wild.
about this before. Football doesn't do this, or when it happens in football, the consequences are generally pretty bad. But out of the contracts given out to players, Roots will end when he's just about to turn 36. Woods will end when he's just about to turn 37. Bairstow at 36. Rashid at 37. Wokes at 36. Milan and Moeen on 1-year contracts at 37. It's. I do think that the contracts complicate it because they have just paid a lot of these guys to play quite a lot because after the T20 World Cup there's a 2-year gap between the next T20 World Cup. So you'd imagine that there'll be some refocusing on ODI cricket in the lead up to the Champions Trophy, and we're saying that basically none of those guys who got contracts are going to be involved.
And presumably there is a budget. So, you might say that, someone like Will Jacks comes into the side and is a clearly established member of the white ball side. Can they just give him another contract? Can they give him a contract even though he's not on the 29? Or at some point do they say, well, we've given all our contract money. Liam Livingstone hasn't played for 18 months, but unfortunately he's on a 2-year deal, or whoever it might be. Presumably the money has to stop at some point, right?
Phil, what about the rest of your squad other than Vince as potential captain? Any other changes?
All right. Well, I'll shout my 15. All right. No, I won't. I'll tell you my 11. With an asterisk against the captaincy. Crawley and Vince to open the batting. Reason being, and I looked at Jacks, obviously. Jacks is a brilliant cricketer. Mysteriously overlooked in that now notorious 29-strong contract list. But Jacks hasn't played a massive amount of 50-over opening the batting cricket. He's made runs with the red ball in the middle order. He's made loads of runs in 20-over cricket opening the batting as an ultra-aggressive opener. But I think in 50-over cricket, I'm not quite sure if he's yet got all the components to be a kind of a complete player against the likes of Bumrah, for example, who just blows you away, or a Mitchell Stark-like player. The thing with Roy, when he played that outlier role, he'd already played a lot of cricket, and he played that role for Surrey for a number of years before England said, right, you're going to beat our lad. And he was also allowed to learn on the job. Now, there's a case to be made that Jacks could be an opening bat, and I think you both put him in as your opening bat, right? And I get it. But I think it's a big ask for him to do that at the moment against world-class swing and seam in the first few overs. So I've gone with the more complete batter in Vince, and Crawley, as you know, I have a soft spot for him, and I think his game is perfect to be a boundary hitter in the first 15 overs of a 50-over game. I'm convinced that he'll go well in 50-over cricket. I've got Brook at 3 for the next 4 years. I've got Duckett at 4, who's a nuggety player and left-hander, hits it in weird areas, plays spin in particular brilliantly, so you need a number 4 who can play spin. So Duckett's your 4. I've got Sam Hain at 5. And I've got Butler, as discussed, if he wants it. And if not, I've got Smith at 6. And I've got Jacks at 7 as my all-rounder, spinning all-rounder. And then I've got 3 quicks in Cass, Archer and Topley. And I've got a leggy in Adil because, again, similar to what I was saying about Butler, if he's fit, then you've got to value these games. And if he's got 2 years in him, then you play him for 2 years. Rayan Ahmed can be a part of my squad of 15, which he is, and he can play in the slipstream, and he can play the odd game, and he can learn from the master. And my 1 or 2 reserves, I got a Dawson stroke Curran for one of my all-rounders, depending on conditions. I got Atkinson on the bench as a reserve seamer, and I've got Dan Lawrence as my reserve batter because he bowls some cheeky off breaks, and he's never been used well enough by England yet. He's not really played 50 over cricket for reasons. He's flittered a bit in 20 over cricket. He's not a player that you hang your hat on in any form of cricket, but he has something unusual, and I could see him blossoming in a 50 over side, bowling a little bit, doing a Liam Livingstone, but doing it better. I'd say he's my reserve. I have got no place for Livingstone in my team.
Just thinking of so your top 6, you haven't got a bowler in there, so you're basically asking Jax to bowl 10 overs every time.
I wonder if this is how selection meetings work.
But I struggle with this as well because Sam Curran has had a miserable World Cup and probably won't play again in the tournament. So I wasn't hugely tempted to pick him at 7, but it's really tricky, that 7 role, because it needs to be an all-rounder, really, like a genuine all-rounder.
So perhaps in my 11 then, Lawrence might slip in there instead of Sam Hain, who you feel deserves a run to say the least, but they don't seem to massively fancy him for whatever reason. So perhaps Lawrence brings an extra kind of element to it. The problem is, as you say though, Joe, I guess Jack solves the problem by being an opener and
he's my sixth bowler, so Curran doesn't have to bowl 10. Curran,
I
almost have Curran as a batting all-rounder at 7 because I think that's where he's strong in 50 over cricket. I think because Sam Curran, 2 years ago he played that knock in India, 95 not out, almost got England home in a game that they had kind of no right to win. I think that's his only 50 in ODI cricket, so it's not much to show for his career so far. But that was a significant. I just think there is more of that to come from Curran. I think his bowling in 50 over cricket sort of muddies the waters because he's not, as we've discussed, he's not that well suited to any particular role like he is in T20 cricket. But I'm still convinced there is value as an all-round cricketer, as long as he's not necessarily having to bowl his 10 every time.
The only reason I hesitated on Jax as an opening bat, and I can see from the balance of the side it totally makes sense, and that wins out if you're looking for options. But I've been depressed by England's commitment to options when it just feels like you're kind of just weakening things anyway. And one emblem of this World Cup has been that your best players are in the top 3. Your classiest players are in the top 3, and there's no room for pinch hitters or outliers or ultra aggressive players. How much better do Australia look now that sort of Mitchell Marsh has moved out of that slot and Travis Head, who's established now as a one-day opener, does the job? How good do India look? Because they have their best 4 players in the country batting the top 4, and so to me it's sort of re-emphasising the age-old values of it. Now, Will Jacks might be good enough for that. Absolutely, he might be. He might have a solid enough technique to deal with moments when conditions are against you and bowlers are on top. He may well absolutely have that, but I'd hesitate to throw him in there just at this point.
Interesting, I guess, that you've not got Pope in your side.
Again, I had him on my list.
It's really difficult, isn't it? Because you got Pope, Duckett, Brooks, Smith, Hayne, as you say. It is even without any of the guys who are currently in India, it's a very competitive.
It's tricky with the seamers as well. I mean, the seamers, there's a lot of batters with really good records. The seamers, you are really taking some punts here. Like Josh Tongue, who I think is just such a good bowler, he can be a good bowler in any format. But if you look at his list day record, 16 wickets from 15 games, an average of 46. And it's a similar story with a lot of the seamers, and they just haven't played that much cricket. And it's hard to see. And also, there's a couple of outlier batters who I considered. Will Smeed, Tom Banton, 2 of the best stroke makers in the country against a white ball. But going back to Phil's point about can Jax cut it as a 50-over opener, I don't know how we're ever going to find out that about Smeed and Banton, and they probably are destined to be T20, T10 cricketers as a result.
This is the madness, isn't it?
Smeed has played 1 50-over game in his career. He got a duck. And I don't know when he's going to next play one. And England would have to probably take a punt on him. He's done something extraordinary in the PSL or the IPL or wherever it might be, and then England say he's so good, we've got to see if he can play 50 over cricket. That'll be the only way they find out. And it might be that they never want to take that punt because there are better options.
I think for those 2 in particular, they don't play first class. Well, Smeed does play any first class cricket. Banton doesn't always play for Somerset. I think that's where it's become particularly tricky.
And Banton doesn't do it particularly well when he does play. It doesn't make it. It doesn't make a persuasive case, certainly.
Because again, when you look at the best top orders in the World Cup, most of these players also play Test cricket. These are players who generally have success the longer the format. They're not just T20 biffers. Away from England, it's been an odd week at the World Cup because we've had two amazing games. South Africa sneaking home against Pakistan by 1 wicket. New Zealand very nearly chasing 380 odd against Australia. The unfortunate thing is that both results actually make the rest of the tournament less interesting. Afghanistan and Pakistan do both have a chance of getting through, but I think it's pretty unlikely.
I watched those two.
Well, okay, on New Zealand, Australia, there are obviously lots of reasons why England aren't doing well at the moment, and lots of reasons why they're off the pace. And this doesn't explain why they're doing so badly, but it perhaps explains why even before the World Cup, there was a relative drop-off compared to 2019. Until the 2019 World Cup, I felt that they were really the only team who were playing the way they did. But it now feels a little bit like the world has caught up with them in terms of style and game plans. So the top four at the World Cup, India, Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, they target absolutely huge scores and take more risks than they did before.
But yeah, South Africa isn't that clear-cut. I mean, South Africa's have also, the England game, for instance, they played it quite cautiously in the first 10 overs, which England, in their pomp, never did. And South Africa are relying on this intimidatingly brutal middle order to come good. And that plan could easily not work if your middle order isn't in fantastic form, but all of them are. Yeah. So it's now the perfect plan. It's just, it's stating the bloody obvious, but form is so crucial. Plans can look very good or very bad depending on if your players are in form. And South Africa's, at the moment, looks absolutely perfect.
That is fair, but I think it's, regardless of how they get there, more teams are getting to the massive scores than 4 years ago. So in 2019, across the whole World Cup, there were 5 team scores in excess of 340. In 2023, they've already been 10, and that doesn't include any of India's run chases, where they've got to 275 and 35 overs.
This is a really good point. Thinking back now to 2019, I remember both the India team and the Australia team came to England. I actually remember a warm-up game in Southampton against Australia when Steve Smith made 100, and I think Australia beat England in a warm-up game. And them being quite disdainful and a bit contemptuous of this slightly circus-like English approach. And because the Aussies have always been the biggest boys in the room, well, we know how to do this, and I'm sorry, boys, but, we're going to school you in this. And they won that game, and Smith made a runnable 100, and they were feeling, understandably at the time, like, we've got this one. And then, of course, as the tournament played out, that safety-first approach, or that old world approach, became exposed. Similarly, it happened with the Indian side as well, under Dhoni in particular. Dhoni's sort of impermeable self-belief was such that he was sure he'd cracked the code. Well, England blew that idea out the water. Well, now teams have caught up, and it turns out that they've got some pretty good cricketers as well executing that kind of plan. Another funny element of this, because it's like a sort of about turn, Bairstow was talking in the build-up to this World Cup, this current one, and in the first couple of weeks, he said, well, look at how India do it. They go slow and steady. If they're 50 for 0 off 12 overs, then that's fine. So we've got to adjust our approach. Well, no, India are aping the theory. India are fine-tuning the theory of going hard early doors. And as you said the other week, Rohit Sharma is the poster boy for it. He's bringing his team along. Australia, same thing. Travis had 109 off 60 balls, first game back.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, in 2019...
They're sort of out-Englanding England, and England have sort of reverted back to the mean of being a bit befuddled and unsure about how to go.
It'll be interesting to see if Australia and India can keep that up when the matches start to matter more, though, right? It's this format does lend itself to having a go, because if it doesn't come off, then you've always got another game to save you. The fact that England is still knocked out of this World Cup somehow proving that point. Will Rohit Sharma, and I think he will, because it seems quite ingrained now, but will Rohit Sharma still play that role in a World Cup semi-final with the whole thing on the line, or a World Cup final with the whole thing on the line, or will India retreat back into their shells to some degree? That will be interesting to see, and I think they seem so full of confidence. I think they will just continue in the same vein.
For me, Australia are the team that I'm really watching hard, because I think we know how great India are, and they show it every week. Australia lost 2 in 2, kind of written off initially, but crucially Head wasn't in that side, comes back, I mean, it's an all-time opening gambit, isn't it? Right? You know, you've been injured, probably weren't going to be in the squad, somehow retained your place because almost miraculously you didn't have to have an operation on a fractured, busted hand. Comes back, 67 balls, 10-4, 7-6, 109. Thanks very much in an hour and a bit.
But he's one of the players I'm sort of getting at in the difference between 2019 and 2023. Head's record is just ridiculous.
It is.
It's averaging
but
60, striking 120.
But what I'm getting at is that things fall into place often, but more by accident than design with these long tournaments. And we've been saying this for weeks. There's something about this Aussie side, I think, that can do something here. Just like South Africa could pull it off. If you're looking for teams that could legitimately beat India, then it's those two, I think. New Zealand have got a puncher's chance for sure, they have. And in Ravindra, who's obviously my new favourite player, they've got a star and depth. But for me, it's Australia. Australia are the ones to really keep your eye on.
Well, Zampa's he's bounced back from us talking about last time to concede 100 or something, wasn't it?
Probably the happiest I've been for an Australian regaining form is seeing Zampa land it. I think Australia look pretty good, and you're right. Things change so much over the course of the tour. I mean, they probably won't qualify, but with Pakistan, Shaheen's looking good. Fakhar looks like he's rediscovered a bit of form. So
is Fakhar back in the side?
Back in the side. He's as we speak going quite well against Bangladesh.
So he's in for Imam, is he?
Yeah, in for Imam.
I'm still not convinced by Australia. Really, they're playing better than I thought they would in this tournament. But if you look at the results they've had, they beat New Zealand, are a good side, but almost conceded 400 runs in response to scoring 400 runs. Other than that, they demolished Netherlands. They beat a Pakistan side that is all over the place on and off the pitch, and they beat a fairly poor Sri Lanka side. I don't think yet they've shown us that they can beat India.
All I'm getting at, Joe, is that they're dangerous. They had India. They had India 2 for 3, and if Mitchell Marsh had caught Kohli, they'd have beaten India in that game.
And also, like you said at the start of the tournament, they're Australia. So in a sense, it doesn't really matter how they're playing. They could still go on and win the thing. And actually, they're playing quite well now. But I still think, Glenn Maxwell's astonishing knock still doesn't really dispel any of the concerns I have about Maxwell in that middle order against the very, very best sides. I still think there are weaknesses. I still think, Cummins has still been very expensive in this tournament generally. Stark hasn't actually looked the same threat with a new ball. I still think they look set for the semi-final, looking at the fixtures they've still got to come. I mean, it would be great if England could pull off a win against Australia just for the sake of the tournament as much as anything else, rather than for
that would probably bump them out, right?
Australia, well, I don't know. You tell me. They've still got to play Bangladesh, who you'd fancy them to win that one. But then there's an Afghanistan game. So if England can beat Australia and then Australia play Afghanistan, that game could be great. I mean, there would be a lot hinging on that game. So.
Yeah, and just on Afghanistan, they've won 3 of their last 4 games and have an outside but plausible route to the semi-finals. We were saying yesterday, Joe, that I think the most striking part of their success is just how eventful the last 2 run chases have been, just very calmly chalking off targets. And actually, the question we had in earlier about picking your England side for the next World Cup suggests that England should bring in Jonathan Trott as their ODI head coach, and Jonathan Trott is doing an absolutely brilliant job because we often talk about what do coaches actually do, but in this case you can actually see improvement of players who previously have played a lot of international cricket but not actually done that much. So he deserves a lot of credit.
Absolutely, that middle order has far exceeded expectations over the last couple of games. When Gurbaz goes early, you kind of feel like the whole thing might fall to pieces, and it hasn't. 2 games in a row, absolutely. Cannily scripted run chases, really. And they've got variety. The fact that Noor Ahmed, who was sensational, slips out the side and is ready to come back in if the pitch is turning, then, I mean, what an asset to have. No one will want to play them at this point, and I think that's the best thing you can say about them, really.
So the dream scenario is that Australia and Afghanistan play off against each other effectively, right, towards the end.
It wouldn't be quite that simple, but it's I think it's Afghanistan's penultimate game, I think.
Yeah, there are a few things that can make the last week or so more interesting. Tomorrow, New Zealand, South Africa, really big game. If New Zealand win that's another way of the last week being interesting, potentially disappearing. Because if New Zealand have 2 games in 4 days against South Africa and Pakistan, they could conceivably lose both of those, and then suddenly they'd have to go to Bangalore against Sri Lanka, probably needing a result. And yeah, Afghanistan have got Netherlands next, Pakistan going well as we speak against Bangladesh, so it's not over yet. Anyway, on the world's biggest stage, there is no hiding place. To some, it is a blur. To others, everything comes into sharp focus. This is the time to seize the moment, paying attention to every detail. What looks effortless is actually born out of diligence, both in sport and in life. This is the time to step up to the plate. Cometh the hour, cometh the man. Congratulations to Keshav Maharaj, who has won this week's Charles Tyrwhitt's Cometh the Hour Moment of the Week for batting for 45 minutes at the end of the South Africa run chase against Pakistan. Phil, this was a game that South Africa in the past tend to lose. There was a steeliness to them at the end to match the firepower up top. As I said earlier, not a result that's potentially great for the tournament, but one that showed that actually South Africa have more to them than we previously might have thought.
We were all crowded round a pub table on the top floor of the Power League football area where we play on Friday nights, and we had it on a couple of phones. We were huddled round watching the end of that game, and it wasn't like anyone had a particular dog in the fight from an allegiance perspective, but there was a collective sigh when Pakistan failed to take that final wicket because of what you're saying. You know, you just want the spectacle to run on and a bit more jeopardy in those final weeks. But look, fair play to South Africa, because it looked like Pakistan had turned the screw in that one. But yeah, as I've said it loads in the last couple of years, but I really like this South African team. You know, I like the makeup of it. I like a lot of the characters involved in it, and they've become a really good story in this World Cup, I think. They're a very, very watchable team. And yeah, we needed that game, right? That was just literally the first one, like game number 29 or whatever of the tournament. It was the first real arse nipper, and then we got another one the following day, of course, with the New Zealand game.
Yeah, I thought as well, like similar to what you were saying about Afghanistan, they can bring in Shamsi for games where they think the pitch is going to do more. And I think with South Africa, he's been interesting that when he's played, he's done well. But Maharaj, looked at the ODI rankings the other day, he's 3rd in the world. Didn't expect that. And Gerald Coetzee, I know we talked about him before the tournament, but he's been really good, keeps on taking wickets. And Marco Jansen, who's a massive question mark for them before the tournament, could he bat 7 and bowl 10 overs? He's taking wickets every game. He can. He absolutely can.
And that they rested Rabada for that game as well, didn't they? Which again shows their depth. That I didn't think they'd be able to do that ahead of this tournament and win games. And
a theme of it for me watching a lot of this stuff has been how desperate the players are to be there and how desperate the players are to get the results. And you feel like it really matters to South Africa because they've gone through some tough times. They've had players that have defected or players that have moved away or players that have thrown in their cards. You've had financial problems, desperate financial problems. You've had a cricketing culture there that has been wheezing for the last couple of years, really. And you came into the World Cup, and I think I sort of wrote with a classic sort of wrong-headedness, you know, that the vibe feels odd and a bit unbalanced with the team. There's been questions regarding Bavuma's leadership through no reason other than there's always been a sort of a murmur around him as a cricketer unfairly. De Kock retiring, as we knew already coming into it. Well, they've coalesced really well here, and there's a clear identity to the team, and they have match winners everywhere from top to bottom. They've got seamers who can do the job. They've got a really good spinner in Maharaj. They've got a second spinner, as you say, in Shamsi. They've got Klaassen, who's an outlier.
Markram's not actually being that frustrating anymore.
No, well, he's
other than the shot he got out.
But yeah, again, brilliant cricketer who's found his role in the team. Bats 4 in 20 over cricket as well. So this is clearly his position now. He runs hard. He's a very clever now middle order white ball cricketer. And played
arguably the shot of the tournament against Harris Ralph. It was like a 92 mile per hour bouncer that he sort of just fends for 6 with both feet off the ground.
Yeah, and De Kock, an enigmatic cricketer, but a sort of a sleeping giant, really, of the modern game. And he could absolutely do this thing. He could pull this off.
Well, in terms of talking about kind of desperation to win, it starting to feel a bit like if South Africa going to do it anytime soon, then this probably needs to be it. With de Kock retiring, he obviously is the absolute kind of fulcrum of that side. Klaassen is the man of the moment, but he's already 32. So, is he still going to be doing this at 36? Quite possibly not. And also, we know South African cricketers don't get paid as much to play for their country. So how many of them might get picked off and won't be playing for their country in 4 years' time? So it kind of feels like, I don't want to say now or never, because you never know how the landscape might shift, but it feels like an opportunity that they probably didn't expect, but now it's here. It's like, well, if we don't grab it now, we won't get another one for a long, long time.
On what you said earlier as well, if you look at why sides might win World Cups, South Africa's super strength is that middle order. It is that Markram, Klaassen, Miller trio in the middle is not just up there. It is the most destructive middle order at the tournament. And you're right, I think Miller's even older than Klaassen,
Yeah.
so... Yeah. Well, anyway, over the course of the World Cup, we're once again working with our loyal friends at Charles Tyrwhitt. Get in on the Dapper action this autumn with 20% off using the promo code WICKET20 at checkout. Next up, we'll be hearing from Saj Sadiq on Pakistan's game against Bangladesh. Cricket 24 is the culmination of a decade of cricket video game development and includes teams from every corner of the globe. Players will be able to take on major cricket nations, including Australia and England in the Ashes, West Indies, New Zealand, Ireland, and more. Plus, for the first time ever, professional Indian T20 teams, all set in over 50 detailed official stadia. Cricket 24 is the most complete video game simulation of cricket seen to date. The game is out now and you can order it at bigant.com. Saj, good to finally have you on after a Pakistan win. They were incisive with the ball, aggressive with the bat. That was more like it.
It's nice to be chatting with you after a win for Pakistan. Yes, it just feels unusual. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those situations where you can say Pakistan played well, but Bangladesh were awful. Yeah, as you say, Pakistan did what they needed to. They bowled the opposition out for 204 early wickets. And then they never really let Bangladesh off the leash, so to speak. They were always in control. There was one concerning time where I just felt Babar Azam gave them a few extra runs, bowled the spinners instead of the pacers. But yeah, overall, Pakistan did really well with the ball. I think they were a bit more sharper in the field as well. Right from the off, you could see that they were pumped up. And the batting, I mean, we'll obviously speak about Fakhar Zaman, no doubt, but he just gives them a different angle to their battling, a totally different approach. And I think the other batters around him, they enjoy battling with him because they don't have that same level of pressure with Imam ul-Haq at the top of the order.
Shaheen is now the leading or joint leading wicket taker at the tournament, which is some turnaround given how he started the tournament. I know Bangladesh aren't the most destructive batting lineup, but it's almost difficult to work out what this result means for how Pakistan are and how much they've improved, because Bangladesh have been, alongside England, the poorest team in the tournament so far. So how do you assess that performance in the field in particular?
I mean, just starting with Shaheen there, I was looking at his speeds, and his speeds were sort of low 130s. So it's one of two reasons. He's either worked the pitch out and thought, well, there's no point trying to break my back on this surface. And he was bowling cutters. And I think he was trying to bowl with more control rather than trying to just bang the ball in at 140 kph. But there is this other angle where people feel that he's not 100% fit, which is a little bit concerning. But he has to play, whether he's 75%, 80% fit or not. He's sort of the leading light when it comes to the ball. And I just thought Haris Rauf started slowly again, his first over, which seems to be a common theme in this tournament. But he pulled it back, which I think he has done throughout the tournament. But I think Mohammad Wasim Jr. deserves some praise because I think he's given the Pakistan bowling a different angle. With Fakhar Zaman with the bat and Mohammad Wasim coming in with the ball, young, no baggage, first World Cup, he's just come in and thought, well, I'm going to bowl 140 kph, I'm going to bowl wicket to wicket, I'm going to reverse the ball and not bother about anything else. So I think he has been a welcome addition to the bowling unit. The Pakistani spinners did what they've done throughout the tournament, fairly average, really. some good deliveries, some not so good deliveries. So that was par for the course. Thought Iftikhar Ahmed, apart from 1 over, did a good job as well. So overall, the bowling unit, apart from, I think Osama Mir had a bit of an off day, I think they did well.
Yeah, you're right to pick out Wasim at the end. No nonsense, fast in-swinging Yorkers. He's great to watch. He's a very Pakistani young fast bowler. He'll go for runs, but he'll also take spectacular wickets. And there was a slightly different balance to the Pakistan side today because Mohammad Nawaz didn't play, and in came Salman Agha, who didn't do anything. He neither batted nor bowled, but it did mean that the 5 bowlers who were picked had to bowl. Do you like this balance?
It's risky, but I think when you're in this must-win situation, then I'm afraid that's the way to go. They've got the 5 bowlers, including Iftikhar, and I think if needed, Salman Ali Agha can sort of turn his arm over and you can get 2-3 overs out of him if Iftikhar's having a bad day. So it's fraught with danger, that selection. But I mean, I was discussing this during the game as well with friends. And what's to say that Pakistan might not go with 4 pacers? So leave Osama Mir out and maybe bring Hassan Ali as well. That's another option for them, obviously, depending on who they're facing in their upcoming games, which we know are New Zealand and England, but depends on the surface. So there are a couple of tweaks that are still possible for Pakistan, but I think they have to go with the 5 bowlers and pack their batting.
On the batting, I thought Abdullah Shafiq looked brilliant as well. Good to see that he's got those gears he can go through. There's one particular shot off Taskin where he just absolutely nailed a hook shot that just flew for 6. He was partnered up top by the returning Fakhar Zaman. What did you make of that performance? 7 sixes today. Only Shafiq and Iftikhar have more across the entire tournament than Pakistan, and that's after Fakhar not playing 5 games on the trot. He was brilliant today.
He's been in horrible form, and if you look at his stats in one-day cricket recently, before this innings, Fakhar's stats were awful. He'd been really struggling for form, for fitness. His confidence was low. He's a confidence player. Time on the sidelines. He's probably been looking at what his flaws were and what he needed to work on. He's come in with a nothing-to-lose attitude, and he's just smashed the Bangladesh bowling all over the park. I mean, the sound of the ball off his bat today was just amazing, really was. And I think he gives the Pakistan batting a different dimension to Imam ul Haq, who is a sort of a 70-80 strike rate type of batter. And not only does Fakhar give the Pakistan team a launch pad, but the other batters, there's less pressure on them. You know, we've spoken about Abdullah Shafiq there. If he was batting with Imam ul Haq, he's probably the guy who would have to sort of take the lead and maybe go for more big shots, try and take a few risks. He doesn't have to take those risks. Babar Azam, Rizwan, if they're battling with Fakhar Zaman, they know that there's a guy there who's going to score at 100 strike rate or more. So overall on that batting unit, there's less pressure.
Arguably, the beauty of this format as a World Cup is that you can lose 4 games in a row and you're still not out. Pakistan only have 2 games left against New Zealand and England. If they win both of those, and you never know, players are returning to form, it is possible that they get to the semi-finals if they win those 2 games. Do you give them much of a chance?
I can't see New Zealand losing all their games because I think that's what Pakistan need. For New Zealand to lose all the games, and then it goes down to net run rate, I think. So there's quite a few permutations there. I just think it's horrible that they're having to rely on other teams when they could have won the Afghanistan game, they could have won the South Africa games, and it would have been in their own hands. I think that's the most frustrating aspect of this, that very much like the 2019 World Cup, they found a little bit of form. But ultimately, I think you've got to realise that Pakistan have only beaten Bangladesh, Bangladesh, Netherlands and Sri Lanka at this tournament. And I say only, that's with all due respect to those 3 teams. So they are going to have to beat 2 of the bigger teams, New Zealand and England, and then hope for the best. Whether they deserve a semi-final spot, even a die-hard follower of Pakistan cricket would, like myself, would question that.
Well, Saj, it's been great to have you on, especially after a Pakistan victory. Thanks for talking to us.
Thank you.
That is everything for today. Cheers, Joe. Cheers, Phil. Thanks for listening, folks. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow.